Mitt the Michigan Mouse, Chapter 9, Digby's Romp. Jack returned and closed the door behind him. He had a brown bag filled with leftover biscuits and bits of bacon. He put the treats in his hand and let Mitt eat until he could eat no more. Mitt felt his belly go round and taut. For a minute he thought that life in town might be sort of nice. But then he looked at his mitten and said, "I think it's time for me to go." "There's just one problem," said Jack. "Like I said before, if my mother sees you, you're dead, remember?" Jack paced back and forth, thinking about how to get Mitt and his mitten out of the house. Then the boy lowered his voice to a whisper and said, "I know, let's get Digby." "Digby? Are you joking?" protested Mitt. The thought of Digby didn't give Mitt much hope. He was big, he was clumsy, and he never seemed to listen. Mitt had no idea how such a dog could get a mouse and a mitten out of the house. Even so, Jack called for Digby. He arrived on the spot, all legs and tail. Jack placed Mitt upon the dog's neck and put the ring of Digby's collar into Mitt's paws. "Now hold on tight, and whatever you do, don't let go until I tell you to," ordered Jack. The boy put the mitten in Digby's mouth and told him to take Mitt downstairs and into the backyard. "But what about your mother?" asked Mitt. "I'll distract her," said Jack. "How?" asked the mouse. "Don't you worry, I'm really good at distracting my mother." Then Jack spoke directly to Digby. "When you get into the yard, sit down by the bird bath and wait for me." Digby nodded in the way that big dogs do, and Jack patted him on the head. He opened his bedroom door, and Digby went down the stairs without much display. Then Jack went into the kitchen and poured a glass of milk, spilling it on the floor. As he and his mother were wiping the well-planned spill, Digby went through the back door to the bird bath. And that's when it happened. A snowshoe hare went racing through the yard, and Digby, giving no thought to sitting by the bird bath, ran off behind it. The hare, being all legs and light-bodied, was as fast as hares can be. It raced down the street, one block after the next, past the factory and along the riverbanks. Then it turned into a long dirt road. All the while, Digby was not far behind, bounding left and right while Mitt hung on for dear life. Running past a barn, Digby dropped the mitten and kept running after the hare. He was gaining on the rabbit when all of a sudden, splash! Digby landed in a huge puddle, stopping him in his tracks. His fur was soaked and his face was so muddy he could not see. And so Digby shook. He shook and he shook and he would not stop shaking. He shook from the tip of his nose to the top of his tail, and Mitt went flying through the air. Not knowing that Mitt had been tossed beyond sight, Digby saw the hare pop up again and continued the chase. Now Mitt was really lost, and his mitten was lost again. Chapter 10, The Cranes. Mitt had landed in a cornfield. Mitt could tell by the hard, stubby stalks and pieces of corn that it had just been harvested. At least he wouldn't go hungry. Mitt filled his cheeks with pieces of dry corn, enjoying every stray kernel. He scooped up the nuggets, sweet and golden, foraging and storing as much as he could. He did not want to be greedy, but did not know how long it would take to find his mitten and get back to the woods. Mitt was collecting his stash when "Gah-roo-ah! Gah-ah-roo-ah!" A strange and eerie sound seemed to be coming from the distance, but Mitt couldn't tell where. "Gah-ah-roo-ah! Gah-ah-roo-ah!" The greater sandhill cranes were coming in, sailing down on a set wings that stretched gracefully from their sides. Upon landing, most milled about quietly on their long, skinny legs, poking around the field for bits of food. Right away, Mitt noticed one crane more beautiful than the others. She was soft gray with pale white cheeks. Her form was tall and slender, yet her back feathers bustled out behind her. Her neck was a gentle curve, and the red on her forehead was a soft, dull rust color. She looked to be the oldest and wisest, and dancing near her was a large sandhill crane with a really bright red forehead. His name was Blessy, and he was sticking out wings wide and turning around in circles, tossing tufts of grass everywhere, while the others paid no attention to him. But before Mitt could get out of the field, Blessy stepped right on top of him and pinned him to the ground. Then, unlike the other cranes walking about, Blessy sat down. Everything went dark, and Mitt could barely breathe. It was more than he could take. "Hey, "What do you think you're doing?" yelled Mitt, but his voice was barely heard from underneath all the feathers. "Did somebody say something?" asked Blessy. "I say, did anybody hear that?" asked Blessy again. All the other cranes answered no, so Blessy didn't think much more about it. But Mitt, on the verge of being squished, had to do something. So he took a blunt piece of thick, dry cornstalk. Poke, poke, poke. He poked at Blessy from underneath. Garoo! Ow! Blessy popped up and noticed Mitt. In doing so, he drew the attention of the others, and they all circled around the mouse. They peered down at him, eyes gleaming and bills sharp, snapping and pointed. Until that moment, Mitt did not fully realize how large a sandhill crane really was, up close. So Mitt thought of the only thing a little mouse in his spot could do. He said hello. And the cranes, in their throaty, warbled way that cranes do, said hello in return. Mitt explained about the birthday party and his mitten, Butterball and Digby and Jack and the hare. He was shivering cold and wet and he had nearly been smothered by a big fat bird. He told them that he wanted to find his mitten and take it back to his place in the woods. Much to his surprise, the cranes understood. "Which way is home? Which way is home?" the cranes uttered out to Mitt. "We will take you. We will take you." While the cranes carried on making all sorts of noises, the beautiful crane Mitt spotted earlier walked up and bowed her head to him and said, "Take hold of my wing, little one, and crawl up to my back. I will take you home and we will find your mitten." Mitt was so happy to find a nice friend and so did as she said. Once settled, he asked her for her name. "It's Toolie," she said. "Toolie?" asked Mitt. "What kind of name is that?" And the beautiful crane answered in a voice that was as soothing as a warm spring breeze. "Toolie is Swedish for wind." Toolie began winging her way along on an updraft until she was soaring high above the field, floating on a tailwind and carrying the mouse towards his home.